We now take a short break before our next topic on NATO weapons supplied for Ukraine that are ending up in regions plagued by wars and terrorists in Africa. Stay with us.
NATO weapons for Ukraine fueling wars in Africa.
The United States and NATO's continued sponsorship of the conflict in Ukraine has led to the rising food and fuel prices in Africa. Now, as if that is not enough, there are reports that NATO-supplied weapons are now ending up in the hands of deadly terrorist groups and rebels in many parts of Africa.
According to Finland's National Bureau of Investigation, Finnish police uncovered arms smuggling from Ukraine to Africa last October. Preliminary investigation indicates that criminals may have gotten their hands on a large number of weapons that had previously been shipped to Kiev.
Russian Defense Minister had previously warned that some of the weapons the West is sending to Ukraine are ending up in the black market.
Коллективный Запад в надежде затянуть конфликт на Украине продолжает масштабные поставки вооружений киевскому режиму. В страну уже доставлено более 28 тысяч тонн военных грузов. По имеющимся данным, часть иностранного вооружения, поставляемого Западом Украине, расползается по ближневосточному региону, а также попадает на черный рынок.
Now, for more on how weapons supplied by Western powers to Ukraine are ending up in Africa, we have contacted Ramiro Funes. He's an activist and political commentator. Thanks for your time, sir, today. Now, what's your take on reports that NATO weapons meant for Ukraine are ending up in regions plagued by insurgencies and terrorism in Africa?
Weapons that are destined for Ukraine are ending up in Central Africa, especially in the conflict-ridden area of the Lake Chad Basin, which is home to the Islamic State of West Africa and Boko Haram. The weapons that are being sent to Ukraine are not only flooding into the region, they're flooding into all areas of the Eastern Hemisphere in which forces of resistance against NATO are being attacked. In Nigeria, in particular in northeastern Nigeria, there is a growing movement of Shia Muslims in solidarity with Iran, in solidarity with the Islamic Revolution, in solidarity with Syria as well, that are being attacked by Western-backed terrorist groups like the Islamic State of West Africa and Boko Haram. And we know that the project of supporting Ukraine is an imperialist project created by the Western powers to destabilize the global axis of resistance led by Russia, China, and Iran.
Outgoing Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari warned last December that weapons from the war in Ukraine are now moving into the Lake Chad Basin region. He noted that these weapons are a threat to regional security.
This illegal movement of arms into the region has heightened the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, which continues to threaten our collective peace and security in the region.
The flow of arms smuggled from Europe to Africa is already leaving its mark. Terrorist attacks in Central and Southern Africa jumped 50% in 2022 compared to previous years and increased by 20% in West Africa. As the NATO-instigated war in Ukraine continues, the security situation in Africa is likely to worsen this year.
As long as weapons are flowing from the United States and the Western imperialist powers toward Ukraine, the situation is going to worsen all over the world, not just in Eastern Europe, but in African countries and also Middle Eastern countries. Those weapons, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars from the US that are all coming from these large weapons industrial complex organizations, Raytheon, Boeing, Smith & Wesson, all these companies that are producing firearms. And most of these weapons aren't even going to Ukraine. They're going to other areas in which the U.S. have their proxy war conflicts. The situation is going to get worse as long as the weapons keep flowing. As long as Washington and Germany and England keep their imperialist presence in these countries, the situation is going to get worse.
Western countries supplying weapons to Ukraine are definitely aware that their weapons are ending up abroad, especially in Africa. Now, these weapons add to the stockpiles illegally trafficked into Africa through Libya after US-led NATO forces invaded the country. Terrorists and insurgents using these weapons have killed thousands of civilians and security forces in Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Niger, and Nigeria. Now, why are European countries and NATO in particular failing to take action to stop this illegal flow of weapons to Africa?
The European countries, the United States, NATO, they're failing to stop the flow of weapons because they actually profit from this model. In a pamphlet titled Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, written by Vladimir Lenin in 1917, he outlined the economics of imperialism. And he mentioned something that is very important and relevant to today, which is accumulation through destruction. The accumulation of profits, the accumulation of money through the destruction. It is no longer the case that the imperialist countries go into colonies and build bridges and ports and highways in order to extract wealth and resources. All they want at this point is pure destruction. They actually benefit from going into a country, bombing it, destroying the infrastructure, and never coming back.
The African Union Master Roadmap of Practical Steps for Silencing the Guns in Africa by 2030 was adopted in 2021. Weapons smuggled from Europe have not only left tens of thousands dead or injured, but have also displaced millions who are fleeing conflicts across the Sahel region in Africa. With the smuggling of European weapons to Africa, the AU might not be able to attain its lofty goal of silencing the guns. African countries should pressurize NATO to stop the flow of these weapons entering the continent illegally from Ukraine.
The biggest action that African nations need to take to prevent the smuggling of weapons from Ukraine and elsewhere is, number one, to emphasize the fact that imperialism is devastating to all nations around the world, to ally with the forces of resistance around the world, like Iran, like China, like Russia, like Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, all nations around the world that are resisting empire, and to understand that as long as you allow French troops, US troops, British troops to enter your nation, to build military bases, this is what's going to happen. They're going to bring chaos and terrorism everywhere they go. Wherever the imperialist powers go, chaos always follows. Look at what happened in Iraq. Look what happened in Libya. Look what happened in Afghanistan. Anywhere the imperialists go, chaos, violence, and terrorism follow.
Now, as we know, Russian military instructors and advisors are now assisting several countries in the continent to combat terrorism. Now, are these weapons being smuggled deliberately into Africa to confront Russians inside Africa?
It would definitely make sense that weapons are being smuggled in toward Central and Northern Africa to combat the Russian presence. Let's remember that Russia does not invade countries the way that the US and the United Kingdom do. Whenever Russia intervenes in a country, it is by invitation. Look at the example of Syria. When President Bashar al-Assad invited President Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation to Syria to help defeat the Daesh terrorist Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, the Russian people did so upon invitation. And the Russian people were warmly welcomed in Syria to help defeat these groups that were created by not only the US and the UK, but also Israel in terms of funding these radical Wahhabi terrorists. Many of these countries, including Chad, Nigeria, and Niger, and other countries in that area, Libya, that looked to Russia to help defeat terrorism because the Russians couldn't get it done. Look at how quickly they were able to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And I can imagine African countries would want similar help from Russia to defeat terrorism in their home countries as well upon invitation. And so what the Western imperialist powers are doing is that they're gearing up, they're arming their terrorist proxies in the region to defeat any sort of Russian presence in the area.
Well, clearly, the Ukraine war is slowly spilling over into Africa through the smuggling of Western-supplied weapons. We shall keep an eye on this matter and keep you posted. I'd like to thank our guest today, Ramiro Fornes, an activist and political commentator. Well, and that brings us to the end of yet another edition of Africa Today. It's been great having you watch the show. You can watch this episode and all previous shows on our website, PressTV.ir. You can also send your comments through our social media handle. Thanks a lot for watching, and goodbye for now.